Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Cameron Constantini. I'm the Policy Director for NUFTI, the National Union for Democracy in Iran. It's a pleasure to welcome you today and our distinguished guests. But to start us off, Dr. Saeed Ganji, the President and Chairman of NUFTI.
Thank you, Cameron. Good morning and welcome to everyone joining us from across the U.S. and beyond. As you know, NUFTI is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of Iranian American based in Washington, D.C., dedicated to supporting the cause of human rights, freedom, and democracy in Iran. As we have a new administration in place with different view and hawkish appeasement towards the Islamic Republic in Iran, we thought to invite a couple of prominent individuals with perhaps different takes on topics called Cyrus Accords, a special forum with U.S. officials. As usual, I will not be too long introduction, as I think is more important for us to hear from our panelists, just in save time. As many of you know, last year under Trump administration, the Middle East was transformed by Abraham Accords, which established cooperative relationship between Israel and the Arab world. Left behind were the people of Iran suffering under the Islamic Republic. Today's panelists served in Trump administration and have spoken of their solution, the Cyrus Accord. Our first panelist is Victoria Coates, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Victoria Coates has a PhD in art history, is an academic and policymaker with senior experience across the US government in Congress, White House, Department of Energy, and US Energy for Global Media. Dr. Coates balances national security agencies against economic viability in order to advance American interest and prosperity, and advocates for US energy industry as the power projector in the evolving geopolitical reality. Our second panelist is Mr. Len Khodorkovsky, former senior advisor to the US Special Representative for Iran. Mr. Khodorkovsky also holds a master's in fine arts, serves at the State Department as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Global Public Affairs, Senior Advisor to the US Special Representative on Iran, and Chief Marketing Officer of America Economic Diplomacy. Prior to joining the government, Mr. Khodorkovsky was an advertising executive for more than 2 decades, where he helped Fortune 100 companies develop global ad campaign and grow their brand and outreach. I'd like to welcome both of our panelists, distinguished panelists, and thank them in advance for their time, insight, and contribution to our cause. Cameron, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ganji, for your introduction as always. And thank you so much to reiterate, as you said, to our panelists who not only are distinguished in each of their respective fields, but because of their work have become really known as friends of the Iranian people. And we're so thankful for all that you have done. And we're really excited about today's panel. So thank you all as well for joining us, whether you're in the Zoom or watching us live on social media. I know there was a significant amount of interest in today's event, given both the interesting topic and the caliber of speakers. So we're excited about today's event. And with that said, we'll hop right in. So Len, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. And I want to talk a bit about events that are happening this week. As a matter of fact, this week, U.S. representatives are meeting with their European counterparts in Vienna, along with representatives of the Islamic Republic. The administration has said, the Biden administration has said that the attempts to negotiate at any cost, represent the only alternative to war with the Islamic Republic. What do you agree with that? What do you think it represents?
Well, first of all, thank you, Cameron, Dr. Ganji, and NUFTI for having us here. Appreciate the opportunity to share our views and advance the cause of a free and democratic future Iran that can live in peace and prosperity with its neighbors. About the current events. Look, I mean, I thought about, if I can encapsulate it in one very diplomatic word, and I would say it's a shit show, Cameron. I'm sorry to say that that's the reality. And look, I mean, what the regime and its supporters and apologists are trying to make this into an issue of either JCPOA or war is absurd. The Islamic Republic has been at war for 42 years. It's been at war with its neighbors. It's been at war with the United States. It was born of the original sin of taking 52 Americans hostage. It continues to take people hostage. It is at war with its own people. Frankly, it's at war with sanity. You know, what's happening in Iran is not logical. It is not the norm. The free world needs to call it what it is. So to say that somehow the United States, by leaving the Iran deal, is moving the region and moving the status of our relationship closer to war is absurd, because the Iranian regime has been at war for 42 years. So in terms of what is happening in the current events in Vienna this week, I mean, I call it the Viennese waltz, which is basically a dance to get us back into a deal that made no sense to begin with. And the whole point of the deal is, because the rationale went from the Obama administration, is to solve the nuclear issue first and then deal with all of the other malevolent issues from the regime. Well, what the regime has proven is that, number one, it's going to cheat on the deal as it did the first go around. And there, you know, and Victoria, forgive me, I'm borrowing your phrase, what the Israeli liberation of the nuclear archive has proven, along with the ongoing nuclear weapons research and development program have proven, is that the regime is not interested in abiding by the terms of any reasonable agreement. They're going to cheat. Number two, the agreement itself paves the way toward a nuclear weapon at the end. You know, at this point, it's in much fewer time than originally. And so it doesn't solve that problem at all. And then finally, you know, the other issues that the deal conveniently puts aside, which is the regime's terrorism, its missile development, which presumably is so that it can deliver nuclear weapons wherever it wants. It's abuses of human rights. I think objectively speaking, the regime is obviously the most destabilizing force in the region. So to say that we're going to put all of those issues aside is, to begin with, in 2015 didn't make any sense. It certainly doesn't make any sense today, 5 years down the road, which is why Secretary Blinken, Wendy Sherman, in their Senate testimonies have acknowledged that 2021 is not 2015, yet the behavior of the Biden administration seems to try to reinvent 2015 again. So the bottom line is, I think we need to live in reality. The Biden administration's job is not to relive their fantasy of 2015, but to protect the American people and act in the best interest of our national security and that of our allies. And that will benefit everyone, us, our allies, and the people in Iran. Anything short of that is just a way to fund the Iranian regime's war machine.
And you hit on a few critical points that I want to come back to, especially the add-on deals. But first, I want to go to Victoria. Victoria, when we've spoken in your writings much more extensively, you've referred to President Reagan and his model as being an effective one in helping bring about the end of the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan was able to solve both the nuclear issue with the USSR while simultaneously engaging Soviet dissidents, working with and supporting the Soviet people, sort of different from what Len just laid out as the Democratic Party's view towards Iran, which is to solve only the nuclear issue first and then perhaps get to the other issues later. Why is the Biden administration so uniquely focused on the nuclear file in your view?
Well, thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Dr. Ganji and Len, for this opportunity. We are very, very proud, Len and I are, to be participating with NUFTI because our work is very much focused on a better future for the Iranian people, because that's what's in the best interests of the United States. I mean, we want a peaceful, prosperous Iran that is a good friend. Some of us can remember those days, are old enough to remember those days. And I think they can definitely come again. There's no reason why not. And I think where the Reagan model is helpful in this case is there is an option between, as Len said, nuclear war and the JCPOA, where we hold the regime to account and recognize that they are an enemy. They have been for 42 years, and call them what they are. That doesn't mean we wouldn't necessarily negotiate with them the way Reagan negotiated with the Soviets, but you do it with moral clarity, and you don't give them moral parity under any circumstances. And we have the disgraceful scene of the State Department spokesman yesterday responding to questions from Andrea Mitchell, who's, in favor of this administration. She's hardly hostile to it, who was trying to get him to say that the Iranians engage in terrorist activities. And what he wouldn't say it, and basically came around to this torturous path that somehow terrorism, sanctions on Tehran for terrorist activities are inconsistent with the JCPOA. So they're going to figure out a way to lift the terrorism sanctions. Same thing with human rights. They just disappeared more than 1,000 people who were killed in the 2019 uprisings from this year's Human Rights Report, because they want to lift the human rights sanctions. It sends a terrible message to the people in Iran who are right now raising their hands, asking for help from the United States. That extraordinary letter that was written in February to President Biden with 30 people by name saying, help us, we want freedom, we are here. They're just turning their backs on them and wasting an incredible opportunity to encourage change from within Iran.
Thank you. And I'll actually pose this question to both of you. It's regarding the nuclear deal, but also all the issues that you both mentioned, which are so critical, of course, to us, to Iranians, to Iranian Americans, not only the Islamic Republic's regional malign activities, what I would refer to as basically the usurpation of half a dozen countries across the Middle East, from Syria to Yemen to Lebanon and others, and the genocide it's committed in Syria, to its support of terrorism worldwide, to its violation of human rights of the Iranian people. Those are areas that the Obama administration, now the Biden administration, in pursuing the JCPOA have said would be tackled in add-on deals, things that they refer to, negotiations that would start after the JCPOA. Their common phrase is they want to put the nuclear program in a box and then go on to discuss other issues. Simultaneously, however, we've heard from whether it's the Islamic Republic's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, who is, we all know, is sort of the regime's main propagandist abroad and in English, and other regime officials that no, there will be no other negotiations. We're only going to talk about this to get sanctions relief, and we will not talk about the missile program, human rights, or others. So how do we square this? Is the Biden administration simply ignoring this? Is there something we're missing? How do they propose to address these other areas? And perhaps more relevant, how would you propose to address all of those areas?
Well, from my perspective, this is I don't know. It's the only conclusion I can come to is knowing what we know today after JCPOA was negotiated, conceived, and all of those other issues were sacrificed at its altar: Syria, Yemen, Iraq, all of those other things. Is that we're going through that dance one more time. We are sacrificing the Iranian people's human rights. We are sacrificing our own national interests in the region. We are, I'm sure, some of you have noticed that, as Victoria mentioned, spokespersons, uncomfortable reply to Andrea Mitchell yesterday. He had a similar uncomfortable reply last week to an AP reporter, Matt Lee, who tried to get him to pronounce the name of the deals between Israel and its neighbors. I don't know if you know what those deals are. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that a State Department spokesperson wouldn't know them. Something about Abraham, I think. But it's clear that this administration is trying to conveniently, yes, not just put the nuclear file in the box in a way that doesn't put the nuclear file in the box at all. It's plain to see that the JCPOA is not an effective way to address even the nuclear issue. But the only conclusion I can come to is that, the Obama administration, I think, tried to rebalance the power in the Middle East in favor of Iran and away from our own allies. And I don't understand that rationale. Iran has been designated as the world's top state sponsor of terrorism by our own State Department for nearly 40 years, the reigning champ of terrorism. So to conceive of a theory where the world's top state sponsor of terrorism somehow is going to coexist and balance a tumultuous region with our friends, Israel, the Gulf states, that are literally on the front lines of this genocidal regime. In the case of Israel, the mullahs call for its complete elimination. It's an existential problem for Israel, which is why Benjamin Netanyahu and the entire Israeli establishment, in a bipartisan way, has said that Iran will never attain a nuclear weapon. I recall, speaking to Israeli diplomats, asking them, "What are the top foreign policy issues in Israel?" And they're saying there are three issues in Israel: Iran, Iran, and Iran. And the same thing will hold true. I think again, paying a lip service to that this administration has done, that they will consult with our allies in the region, that they will not just on landing but on liftoff. I'd love to see that happen, but it's not happening. It's not happening in Vienna either, by the way, where the United States, the United States has outsourced the terms of our surrender to China and Russia, along with others, instead of the other way around. The only thing that we should be negotiating with the Iranian regime are the terms of its surrender. And so, here we are in a situation that to me doesn't really make any sense and doesn't really address the core issues. So the only thing I can think of is the strategic objective here is to, again, relive the fairy tale of a stable, balanced Middle East anchored by the world's top terrorist regime. It doesn't make any sense to me.
We're going to get in a minute after we transfer into a different way to rebalance the region, which the two of you have proposed and is the namesake of our event. But Victoria, I want to give you the chance to talk on this same issue first, please.
Right. I think not surprisingly, I agree with Len. The issue here is that if we look at the JCPOA from the 2015 timeframe, it did not result, even with the lifting of sanctions, in the systemic rebuilding of the Iranian economy, which is going to be required to make Iran into a modern nation state that's prosperous and secure, which is what we all want. And so I was reminded of a quote from General Eisenhower, which was, if you can't solve a problem, enlarge it. And so I think, if you're looking at the aftermath of the JCPOA, there was just enough economic relief to give a lifeline to Tehran. None of that benefit came down to the Iranian people. And the economy continued to limp along because even though the sanctions were technically lifted, private companies are not the boldest creatures on the planet. And the avalanche of foreign direct investment into Iran that had been proposed, or envisioned rather, under the JCPOA simply didn't materialize. Some companies kind of nibbled around the edges, but it's so unstable and so risky a market that nobody would go in whole hog. That will continue to be the case because everyone will look at the clock and think, gee, in 2024, what if we have a different administration? What if even in 2022, the Republicans retake the Congress? Are a whole bunch of new sanctions coming? So this isn't going to work in terms of fixing Iran. And I would put the China deal from last month in the same box. That's all going to be Chinese state-owned enterprises coming in with Chinese workers to do projects that advance China's interests. And what they want is a cheap gas station. That's what they probably purchased. But $400 billion over a quarter of a century doesn't fix Iran either. So, they're engaging in these deals that go straight to the mullahs and to their coffers and to their military programs, including the nuclear file. Nothing goes to the Iranian people. And that's why this is dysfunctional. It's simply not going to work.
Well, thank you so much. And I think we're going to get back to that point about FDI and some actual ways we could help the Iranian people in a second. But Len, to you, getting to the focus of today's event, you talked about the JCPOA being a rebalance for whatever reason in the region to the Islamic Republic. The Cyrus Accords seems like it could be a rebalance of a different type. Why do you think it is the alternative diplomatically and regionally to what you've previously termed as the JCPOA's sort of short-term and short-sighted decision to, again, allow a hegemony by the Islamic Republic in the Middle East?
Well, I think, number one, I think Abraham Accords have shown that a new peaceful and prosperous Middle East is possible, even among nations that could not find common ground for a long time. In the case of Abraham Accords, the descendants of Abraham, the Jewish descendants and Arab descendants of Abraham have finally decided that they have more in common than they do have different. And they are now well on the way of building ties beyond security ties into other economic ties, cultural ties, and all the things that normal countries do when they focus on what's best for their people. That's what happens. So Abraham Accords has shown the way, and Victoria and I have wrote an article a little while back calling for a similar approach to engaging the descendants of Abraham and descendants of Cyrus in similar accords called the Cyrus Accords that would build ties between the people of Israel and between the people of Iran with American support, with the support of Iran's neighbors, because at the end of the day, the people here are not at war. The only entity that's at war is the regime of Iran on everybody in the region, and the United States as well, in the West. To what are the roots of the Cyrus Accords? Well, I mean, they make total sense to me. What's happening in the last 42 years is a historical anomaly. If you look back to the relationship between Jewish people and the Persian people, Cyrus the Great liberated the Jewish people from their bondage in Babylonia. Cyrus allowed Jewish people and other people to practice their religion, to practice their faith, and was a champion of openness and tolerance and religious freedom. That is a very good place to start in rebuilding the relationship. So in a way, Cyrus Accords, I think, provides a platform that creates an alternate reality here, completely dismissing the regime itself. The regime is the aberration. The normalcy is the peaceful relationship between the people. And what we can start moving toward is building those ties so that eventually, as I love saying, when the regime is on the ash heap of history, we're not starting from scratch, but we already established ties and reignited the intertwining of these two peoples with the free world behind them. And I know Victoria has her own thoughts about what that could look like. And I love listening to all the possibilities, Victoria.
There's certainly, and actually this is our next question, Victoria, for you. So in the past, as Len has said, you've spoken and written extensively and if I may say really eloquently about some specific examples of whatever you want to call it, whether it's people-to-people diplomacy or how we can bring the children of Cyrus and the children of Abraham closer together. Right now, what might those look like? What might be some specific examples of doing that?
Well, and this, I think, is a worthy project for us all to engage on. As Len said, if there is a a change in Iran, whether it be a fundamental change in behavior on the part of this regime or a political change instigated by the Iranian people, the United States and Israel and our Gulf allies need to be ready to step in and assist that change and support the development of civil society. If you look at a situation like Iraq, for example, I think we were not prepared to do that, and wound up handing a whole bunch of stuff to the military. That's a longer conversation on a different topic, but we don't have to do that this time. And I think, as Len said, we have the Abraham Accords as a basis. So fundamentally, I would see the Cyrus Accords as beginning with renouncing hostility, which is just a basic tenet. So no more great Satan, no more little Satan, no more eradication of Israel. It doesn't mean Iran can't be a secure country. I mean, Iran will have a military. That's not the question here. But if they renounce hostility toward their neighbors, particularly Israel, that opens up a whole range of possibilities in terms of embracing prosperity. And we can get into that some more, but that fundamental renunciation of hostility is what allowed the United States to invest in countries like, say, Germany and Japan, right after we fought a world war against them, in which hundreds of thousands of Americans were killed. Unbelievable that we would then turn around and negotiate to establish thriving democracies and thriving free market economies over the course of the last 75 years. What an achievement. But what it shows is we can do that. We have a history of doing this. We know how to do it. It's hard. And yes, it's expensive, but how much money have we made with the Germans and the Japanese over the years? This is precisely why we make this kind of investment. So I would certainly see, for example, those two countries, for example, as illustrative examples of how you would structure an accord with Iran in which their fundamental contribution is the shift to renounce hostility. Our contribution is then to show them the path to prosperity.
And I think to a point, you see that although it's on a political level, obviously the Islamic Republic is still, as Len said, the leading sponsor of terror in the world. But between the people of Iran and Israel, the people of Iran and the United States, I think you both have seen the images, and I think our audience and those who watch later have also seen, the Islamic Republic paint or put the American and Israeli flags on the ground in front of the entrances to mosques or to schools, and Iranians deliberately walk around them or jump over them. And those few who would walk over them, they're heckled, they're called out, they're screamed at to get off the flag. So to that point, Victoria, we already have, to a great extent, I believe, based on what we see, and I think perhaps you agree, the renunciation, the reduction of hostilities between the peoples of these two countries. So before there is that ideal political change and a free and secular democratic Iran that we all hope for and that you referred to, right now, while the Islamic Republic is still in power, you've talked about this also and written about this. How might the free world, how might the United States or Israel or European countries or Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, how might they help Iranians now and sort of, as you both said, start that relationship, start building up that goodwill even before that political change? Are there ways that we can do that?
It's obviously difficult because any aid that goes into Iran is immediately hijacked by the regime and reused for its purposes. They do that with everything. They've got a real bad pharmaceutical problem, for example. Len and I had proposed using one of the Mercy-class hospital ships, a unique asset of the U.S. military, to offer COVID vaccinations to the people of Iran once our and Israel's vaccination needs are taken care of. The other, I think, very specific thing we could do that we were working on at the end of the last administration, didn't quite get it over the finish line, but using the new satellite possibilities for beaming internet access into remote or underserved areas that was developed after the hurricanes in 2017, now being launched on a commercial scale. SpaceX just launched Starlink, I believe is the name of their satellite system. It's going to be tens of thousands of satellites. Not surprisingly, our friends in Beijing have also announced that they're going to have a network, which I'm sure will be the opposite of the free and open Starlink. But we could do that. We could get broadband into Iran that could be encrypted and would be separate from their national information network, the NIN, which is what the regime uses to control information going both in and out. When we had the protests in the southeast last month, which to my knowledge are ongoing, but I mean, it's very hard to have clarity on the situation because the regime simply says, calm has been restored, and then puts an internet blackout on the area so nobody can communicate. Just allowing folks to communicate with each other, that's not an act of war. That's just a gift from the people of America to the people of Iran. And I think by doing that, we both make our brand free speech. You know, that is a fundamental right bestowed on American citizens by our Constitution. It is unique, and I think it is the opposite of what's being marketed by the PRC, for example. Their brand is repression and censorship. And so making that distinction crystal clear, and then showing that the United States will put assets, will put treasure behind this in order to get this capability to the Iranian people would be an extremely powerful gesture.
And I should add on the internet, but you've written a great piece in Newsweek, if I'm not mistaken, about this with a colleague. So I would urge everyone to read this. And in the follow-up to this event for attendees, we'll send that link out to make sure everyone can read it. It's a really excellent piece. Len, did you want to add something here, or shall I go on to the next question?
Well, I think back to the basics here, and you know, you or your viewers might know, I came to the United States as a refugee from the Soviet Union during the Cold War, along with my family. And by the way, it's my dad's birthday, who's probably watching right now. Happy birthday, Pa! But in those days when the communists ruled the Soviet Union, obviously there was repression of citizens who wanted to speak freely, who wanted to assemble freely, all those basic rights that Americans and Westerners take for granted. And one of the most important things, and Natan Sharansky wrote about this, when he was in solitary confinement on his hunger strikes, the one thing that penetrated those walls of the prison were verbal support from President Reagan and the American people. They reached him behind those walls, and they empowered him to continue to fight for freedom and for to demand the rights that every human being deserves. So I would start with the basics. Number one, it must be clear that the American government, the government that is founded on freedom, the government that is founded on respect for human rights, stands with the people of Iran. That cannot be, that must be reiterated every single time, which is why in the Trump administration, we made a concerted effort to distinguish everything we did from what we're doing related to the regime in Iran and how we feel about the people in Iran. That is, and I believe that came through. And the United States cannot stop doing that. Just standing and calling out the atrocities for what they are is in and of itself important. And I think it empowers people in Iran to continue their fight for their own rights. As far as what we can do from the outside, well, there are some practical things that could be done, as Victoria said. We know that there are all sorts of agricultural challenges that Iranian farmers are facing, for example. We know that entrepreneurs would love to have some seed money to start their own businesses. There are ways in which all of us in the free world can make it easier for people in Iran to improve their lives, because their government is clearly not interested in improving their lives. So yes, there are some practical things that we can do on a micro level, But look, the reality is that, the people in Iran are going to be the ones who determine their own destiny. And our job on the outside is to support them, is to be vocal about the basic human rights that they deserve, and in their own struggle to build a country that where they can live as they wish. I mean, if you just, it's so frustrating watching young Iranians have to leave Iran to fulfill their destiny. A country that's such, with such rich heritage, with such potential, so technologically savvy, so educated, and its best and brightest are forced to leave Iran to, to live to achieve their, their God-given potential. That is crazy. That is crazy. And I think the Iranian people see that, and I think they see their children have to leave. Even the regime officials see their children abandon, the paradise that they've built. And I say that, of course, with all I don't know, dark humor. But they see that. And just as I remember when I was growing up, I saw the duplicity of the environment in which we were growing up in, where you couldn't speak too loudly about certain things. You assumed that people were listening to your phone calls. You had to write letters in code. I mean, nobody writes letters anymore, but you know what I mean. Emails in this case. And people know that the reality is that the ruling regime can only survive by suppressing them because it lacks real legitimacy. The regime simply does not enjoy legitimacy. And to bring it full circle to what's happening right now with JCPOA negotiations is, unfortunately, instead of building on top of the pressure that was accumulated over the last 4 years and weakening the regime, which is in the best interest of not just our national security, but the Iranian people, all of these signals of concessions that only serve to provide a lifeline to the world's top terrorist state. And that I cannot imagine is in the best interest of anybody.
Thank you, and first of all, a very happy birthday to Mr. Khodorkovsky, the original Mr. Khodorkovsky. We hope you have a great birthday, and thank you for sharing your son with us on your birthday today. We appreciate it. I apologize if I'm sort of looking at my phone. This is not Persian nicety. I'm being overwhelmed with texts and WhatsApps and signals saying these two are so great, and people are just so appreciative already live of your comments. So I just want to, as of now, thank you on behalf of all the people who are watching us on a variety of social media platforms. They appreciate really all you're saying, even as we're live. So thank you. But Len, your point about Natan Sharansky is so interesting, and it's so apropos for Iran. You probably recall, and our audience may recall, that in 2009 in Iran, we had the massive Green Movement protest. You saw similar things. I mean, Iranians were in the streets chanting Obama, Obama, Yabama, Yabona, which conveniently rhymes in Persian, but in English means, Mr. Obama, are you with us or are you with them, the regime? And oftentimes they'll hold up signs in English, in French, and other languages. As a friend of mine jokes, they're not practicing their linguistics. They're trying to send a message. And so your point about Natan Sharansky is so relevant. And I can tell you, I'm sure each of you know this, but the work that you all did in the previous administration meant so much to Iranians, and it really got to them. And be it the efforts that you spoke of, Victoria, of trying to get internet to the Iranian people, whether it's the messaging and separating the people of Iran from the Islamic Republic, it does mean so much. And we saw that in action over the past several years. And so just again, thank you for all that. We have a few more questions for our panelists, but just to our audience in the room and those who are watching us elsewhere, I'm monitoring some questions on social media as well. In a few moments, we're going to end the program with questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, please feel free to send it in the Q&A chat function. We also get most of our questions from social media, so please feel free to send them there as well. Victoria, you talked earlier about this recent deal between the Chinese Communist Party and the Islamic Republic, and how this $400 billion over its 25-year period won't be truly impactful to revitalizing the Iranian economy, which has been just destroyed really by the Islamic Republic. In this Cyrus Accord world, in a so we sort of talked about how Cyrus Accords can be enacted in the current phase when the Islamic Republic is still in power with internet, medical aid through the Mercy class ships, COVID vaccines, etc. But in the ideal scenario that I think we all want, which is a free and democratic Iran, what might we see in terms of actual impactful multilateral deals between a free Iran, Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, Israel, the United States? I mean, is there potential to see actual investment in a country like that and actual growth and sustainability?
Oh, I think there absolutely is. And one point I wanted to make about the Abraham Accords is, if I had told you in 2017 that we would be sitting here in 2021 with multiple deals, open deals between Israel and Arab Gulf nations and North African nations, and that I mean, one of the things I'm deluged with in my private industry work are requests from both sides, both the Israelis and the Arabs, to find ways to increase economic synergy. That's what they both want, and it's what their people want. And there's very little, if any, pushback against that from the so-called Arab street. So I think we can assume the same thing with Iran. The China deal is a terrible deal for the people of Iran. Their response, I think, has been clear. Our country is not for sale, they keep chanting. And, as I said, I can't come up with a single instance where Chinese investment had a beneficial ultimate result for any country. And if you look at the countries they most closely dominate, such as Burma or North Korea, it's horrible what's happened. So, importing totalitarian communism is rarely the recipe for prosperity and security. So, that simply won't work. There's literally no question in my mind. And, what is a prerequisite to success in Iran will be the security situation. It has to be a lower risk, less violent, potentially destabilized place. And then I think the sky is the limit. There is energy cooperation. One area I really wanted to emphasize is environment. Iran is an environmental catastrophe and only getting worse. We have the technology to help. Israel has the technology to help. Saudi Arabia, UAE are both at the forefront of developing alternative energies, various other climate sensitive technologies. Everyone in the region has a vested interest in assisting the sort of rectifying of that situation. And so that could be a very strong component of it. Then Iran becomes a great place to do business. They could be included in a number of the different regional logistical programs that are being put together, be they highways, pipelines, railways, increased flights between destinations. We were laughing about it yesterday that the last time I tried to go from Tel Aviv to Manama, I had to go by way of Tbilisi and to actually fly to the Republic of Georgia. Not that I minded, it's a beautiful country, but I wasn't there long enough to do anything. But now that's going to be an hour and a half flight, a very easy thing to do. Tehran should be on that trajectory as well. And all of that very quickly will increase the industrial scale investment that we know the European countries who traditionally very profitably invested in Iran, particularly Italy and Germany, and France, eager to go back in, the UK, if the atmosphere is correct. So getting to that correct atmosphere has to be our goal.
Thank you very much. Before we go to some of the audience questions that we're getting, Len, a final question for you. You have been perhaps one of the more vocal U.S. government officials and very expressive in your standing with the Iranian people. Obviously, I know so many in the previous administration did, Victoria among so many others, but you were very active on social media about in expressing your support and solidarity with the people of Iran. Obviously, you have a background coming from another totalitarian state. But of all the countries in the world where oppression exists, what is it particularly that draws you to the cause of freedom and human dignity in Iran in particular?
Well, I have to agree that, for a diplomat, I was pretty undiplomatic toward the regime, and continue to be. I hope I hope I don't get in trouble. I guess too late at this point. So look, why Iran? I think the roots of my interest in Iran are related to my own personal antipathy for all sorts of dictatorships. Not really growing up in a place that suppresses freedom. I kind of have the same dislike for all authoritarians who suppress people's freedom. If I somehow managed to work on the Cuba portfolio or Venezuela portfolio, I'm sure I would have been just as, as somebody called it, pugnacious in my approach to those countries. But the second thing I think comes from my own family. I'm a grandson of Holocaust survivors. My great grandmother died on the streets of a Nazi ghetto, trying to feed my grandfather, prevent him from dying from starvation. My grandparents were in Nazi labor camps. I understand, and when I see what was emanating from the regime in terms of its Holocaust denial and its almost dismissive attitude toward such a catastrophic moment in the history of humanity in general, but certainly in the history of my own family, that hit home. That really hit home. And I forget who was the original person who said this, but when you hear terrorists say what they intend to do, you have to listen. We just cannot dismiss that. And when I was fortunate enough to land at the State Department, I don't know how they let me in, but when I got there, I knew that it was important for me to spend my time doing what I can to live out my my beliefs and to do what I could to prevent another genocide. And Iran, with Khamenei's frequent dismissals of the Holocaust, its Holocaust denial, its his continual. I mean, I think that's at this point it's part of the regime's matrix of messaging. How to destroy, how to completely erase Israel from the face of the map. It really bugs a guy like me. And so when I had the opportunity to work for the Iran Action Group at the State Department, I became really passionate about trying to contribute in any way that I could toward certainly a better region, a better Iran, and better humanity, because there's really no place in a humane world for that kind of for those kinds of threats. And when Ayatollah Khamenei says that he's going to erase a country that provided refuge to my own people, and when he encourages chants of death to America, my second home, that hits home for me, and frankly, I take it personally. But I think really that's why, that's how I gravitated to Iran, and now it's in my veins. Now I guess I'm an honorary Persian for all intents and purposes. So this cause will always be with me, and I'm proud to stand with the great people of Iran, and I've made so many friends of Iranian origin who I cherish, and I will always stand with them for what's right, and that's freedom for the good people of Iran. And I want to be sure. I want to be a contributor toward an eventual peace between Iran, Israel, the United States, and all the countries in the region. And I look forward to eating a great meal in Tehran one day.
Well, thank you so much, and the meal's on me, but I'm sure there'll be a long line of people wanting to buy you both meals in the free Iran. Thank you so much, both of you. With your permission, I know we're coming close to the end of time. This is the problem we often face with such interesting topics and even more interesting guests. But hopefully we'll have the pleasure of having both of you back on this and many more topics down the road. I'm going to try and just keep it to one question each here at the end, because I know you're both quite busy. First, Victoria, you spoke quite a bit about the China deal, and then we asked you a specific question about the China deal. This may be a bit more of a legal question, but please feel free and take it in whichever way you'd like. A lot of Iranians, of course, under the control of the Islamic Republic, you referred to the chants that they've had in the streets, both in the country and abroad. Iran is not for sale. One of the other more common things they've been saying is that this is an illegitimate deal, or that it's a deal that's null and void, mainly because it was signed by a regime on behalf of the people that is not elected by the people. Do you have any thoughts on that regard? I mean, is this a legitimate deal in your view? Again, I recognize this may be a bit more of a legal question, but again, please feel free and take it in whatever direction you want. Maybe what the future may look like. Again, the floor is yours again on the China deal.
Right. No, I think that's a very interesting question. And, there are a variety of different mechanisms that can be used to enter into these kinds of agreements. The JCPOA is a classic cautionary tale because there was no support for the deal among the American people and their duly elected representatives in the Congress. The Obama administration did not do what they should have done, which is send a deal like that to the Senate to be ratified as a treaty. That then you have a lot of trouble unwinding, because you have done the heavy lift of getting the majority of the American people to support what you want to enter into. And so they didn't do that. I'd point out the deal was never signed. It went into effect via United Nations Security Council resolution, which I don't find as a United States citizen in any way binding, which is what allowed us to get out of it and would allow us to get out of it again. And I think we need to be very, very clear that whatever arrangements are made in Vienna over the next few weeks are not binding on the American people, and that a future administration would have a different path. Same thing for the Iranian people. If they were able to express their unhappiness over the deal through an actual legitimate political process, I would expect the United States would support a government of Iran getting out of that deal and into a better deal with us. And again, I would just point to the historical examples that deals with us are just a whole lot nicer than deals with the PRC.
Thank you so much. I think that's very hopeful outlook for a lot of Iranians. Len, we'll end our program with you, and it's a question about something which I know you know a good amount about, which is the recent No campaign, the No to Islamophobia campaign. Victoria, you may have also seen it on social media. I know a lot of probably people who are watching this now and later have also seen it. But just as a 10-second history, it started inside Iran with this very sort of easily recognizable down symbol, which is just a very simple no to the Islamic Republic and all that it represents. And because it's perhaps so simple, it's become real source of unity amongst a notoriously divided opposition or Iranians. And what is your sense of this no campaign? How do you think it's going this far? What do you think is the potential for it? How can Iranians, widen and strengthen a campaign like this against the Islamic Republic?
Well, I did notice it. I even had a T-shirt made with the word "no" on it.
You do. I think you may have broken Iranian Twitter with that one.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
One too.
So, look, I think America has a history of peaceful disobedience. The obvious example is Martin Luther King's civil disobedience movement that brought attention to the cause of civil rights in the United States, for example. And I think what the No campaign is turning out to be is an example of civil peaceful disobedience that clearly states the view of the Iranian people about what's going on in the country. And the useful thing about the No campaign is that it's as you said, it's very simple and translatable that anybody anywhere can understand. Why are so many people from different sectors and different geographies and different backgrounds gravitating toward this campaign? Some of them actually putting their freedom and lives in danger by doing so. Why are they doing that? It's not because they're pleased with what JCPOA produced or what the regime has promised and broken for 42 years. It's that they've had it. They've had it. There always comes a time when you have tremors that lead to an earthquake. And what we've seen over the years is tremors, whether it's the protests in the 90s, the Green Revolution, the protests in 2019. There have been tremors all along, and eventually they end up amounting to an earthquake. And I think the peaceful disobedience template is a good one. It's clear. The one thing that I think would be great in order to capture the world's attention and move this the message out of Iran and into the world's consciousness in the way that, for example, the South African apartheid campaign moved out of South Africa into the free world, and in a way that we've seen demonstrations in Venezuela with 1 million people on the streets that have transcended just a local story. I think it's incumbent on all folks, Iranian Americans, anyone who seeks freedom for the Iranian people, or just a stable and peaceful region, is to echo what the Iranian people are trying to communicate, to appreciate the danger they're putting themselves into, and to provide more oxygen to the campaign. For folks like me and Victoria, I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that when we go and write about what's going on in Iran and talk about it in the media, that we pay our respect to the efforts that the Iranian people are putting in themselves. And I would say, the template's a good one. And, whether it's the No campaign that eventually evolves into a yes campaign to a democratic Iran, I think there are ways to approach getting the message out, and this is a good one. And I certainly appreciate all the people who are not just putting their own freedom in danger, but I appreciate the people on the outside of Iran who are supporting that message and bringing attention to the cause.
Well, obviously yourself included, and other great friends like Victoria and so many others. this has been a really fascinating discussion. I hope that it is just the first time of many that we have the pleasure of hosting Victoria Coates and Len Khodorkovsky, two real, as I've said several times, and I truly mean friends of the Iranian people, leaders in their own right in national security and American interest, to discuss the Cyrus Accords, the potential for future for peace between a free Iran, Israel, Arab nations of the Persian Gulf, and really the whole world. So thank you again to you, Victoria, and to you, Len, for offering us your thoughts and your expertise today. It was really a pleasure to hear from you, and I know that this is going to be probably one of our more well-attended and well-seen events because of the two of you and this fantastic topic. So thank you again so much for joining us today. It was really our pleasure.
Thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Dr. Sajji.
Thank you, Cameron, Nufti, and everybody who tuned in.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.